he hit the law books and reviewed a boatload of cases. So without further ado, Suhag Shukla and Sundar Iyer.
Thank you so much, Sheetal, for that kind introduction. I just want to do a tech check. Can you see me?
No.
Yeah, that's what
we can see Sundar.
Okay.
So welcome, Sundar.
Welcome, Sundar. And I will just see what's going on with my camera, which just stopped working all of a sudden. Can you see me now?
No.
Okay.
But we can hear you just fine.
You can hear me just fine. Just give me 1 second. Tech support. Thanks, Parth. All right, we are back online. Thank you so much, Sundar, for joining us. I know this is a very busy time, but we really appreciate your commitment to the cause, certainly. And I do miss our daily check-ins, but I'm sure they will reconvene in January. But I want to start kind of in a place that maybe not everyone is aware of. I think there's a lot of folks who have heard your story. We certainly were shocked in June of 2020 when we saw headlines splashed everywhere in what was being touted the first of its kind lawsuit over an allegation of caste discrimination. And I remember the back and forth conversations here at HAF, and things just weren't adding up. We're like, this sounds and smells a little fishy, but we had no way of knowing. We certainly didn't know you. We didn't know how we would get in touch with you. And we were just as shocked as probably so many people in our community. Now, probably one of the most shocking things to us was the kind of xenophobic and racist rhetoric that not just the press release, but even the complaint itself contained. I mean, it was shorthand for watch out for those dirty, nasty foreigners, and they're importing their nasty ways with them. And it was all pointed towards South Asians and Hindus. So it was day one for us, but it wasn't for you. It was probably year 3, year 4, maybe longer. So I want to take us back to the beginning of this sordid tale. And I'm going to pinpoint that as when you first met John Doe. You knew each other from back in India. And so start there. How did you know John Doe?
Yeah, this is fairly public record at this point. But first of all, Suhag and HAF, just wanted to thank you for having me and appreciate the opportunity to speak to a wider audience. Especially for a story that the press refuses to report. But I think the truth is important, and it's important to disseminate what it is. I've known John Doe since 1994, ever since we went to the Indian Institute of Technology for undergrad together. Mm-hmm. And lost touch with him a fair bit after we graduated. And I reached out to him in 2015. A year into me sort of ruminating on the startup and setting things in process at Cisco. So I started the startup company within Cisco in September of 2015, and I reached out to John Doe in roughly a couple months prior to that. And so I've known John Doe as a colleague back in undergrad, as a classmate, and also roughly in the friend circle and an acquaintance.
So you reach out to him. You're obviously you're starting a Cisco startup a startup that's being incubated in Cisco. You want to bring the best team together. What did you do to do that? And what was it about John Doe that made you reach out to him?
Yeah, the generic thing in hiring, whether it be Silicon Valley or for the matter, most other workplaces, is you go and hire the best people for the job. Mm-hmm. we had a very unique situation. I had jumped in from a career starting in networking and software back to hardware for almost 15-ish years, and then came back to build this company, which is back to a software company. So I was just getting back into a number of things, meeting folks, building resources, building a network of software engineers to incubate the startup called Candid, in fact. So when we started Candid, in a period of 18 months, we had to hire almost 60 plus people, including consultants and students. We've gone to almost 80 plus folks. And so that hiring was intense, and I had to go and hire experts in many different areas. I hired John Doe no differently than anybody else, which is you're looking for a particular form of expertise. You reach out to 8 to 10 people in that space. Hiring is very tough in Silicon Valley. Pulling out people is not easy because they're in existing startups and jobs and cushy packages to some extent.
Right.
And so I reached to John Doe for a particular expertise in an area, but I won't go into the specifics of the details given where we are, and solicited him. He was amongst, I think, more than 7 or 8 candidates that we had interviewed for the position. Some whom we had interviewed prior, who had accepted and then rescinded because it's a competitive valley, and took a period of 3 to 4 months where we closed on John Doe's position.
So I have 2 questions, and you can answer them in whatever order, but you talk about this competitive market. People have cushy packages. So what does Sundar Iyer do to ensure that he gets the best people? I know you've told people what you did, but I think people need to know what you were willing to give up to bring the best team to make sure that this baby of yours, Candid, would see successful fruition.
Yeah, so I mean, Candid was my foray back into software and distributed systems and big data, if you will. And Candid was actually focused on formally verifying networks. That was the core idea of Candid, which is how do you ensure the truth in a data center or a network to prevent mistakes? And funnily enough, technology parallels life, because I think my bigger journey on truth has not been about data centers and the internet, but it's been about humans and human behavior. But your particular question, you're looking to which particular aspect, Suhag, on Candid?
So in recruiting, when you're
Right.
recruiting a team, right? You're a startup. There must have been some benefit for you to incubate it at Cisco.
No, absolutely. So we had raised, several tens of millions of dollars in funding from Cisco. And what I chose to do, I was the CEO and founder of the startup, was I told Cisco I would be giving away 100% of my equity. So I essentially took nothing. What's called the PRSU grants, these are a technical word for the stock grants, is $0 in the startup. And I gave it away to all of my employees, including to John Doe, who made a package of several millions of dollars. So these packages to these early stage employees were far beyond what would be given to a Silicon Valley engineer. And what's interesting here is these packages come with a lot more surety than any other normal startup. They're not stock options of a company that could eventually become big. These are stock grants. You actually give away Cisco stock, which are, of course, publicly traded. You can sell them for a fair, cushy sum of money. And so John Doe made several millions of dollars, as did several others in the company, partly because of how well we both treated them, how well Cisco treated them. And of course, I personally sacrificed to build a good and loyal team.
Right. And so you're saying you have hired 60 people. Give me an idea of the makeup, because the way that, the CRD, the Civil Rights Department, California Civil Rights Department, which is the key body that is the enforcing arm for non-discrimination law in the state, they're painting a picture of, all Indians running amok, bringing their discriminatory hierarchies with them to America. But from what I understand, that's not what your department looks like.
It's a funny thing when people put a sort of identity politics to different things. If you to give you an analogy, if you went to a university and you looked at digital signal processing groups almost 15 to 20 years back, you'd find a large number of Iranians. For no other reason, from the fact that many Iranian students work in that field. If you look at networking, it's not uncommon that networking groups, especially a combination of hardware and software, tend to be more Indian and Chinese dominated from the perspective of the size of their populations. This is because many of them tend to go there. This is almost nothing to do with discriminatory hiring practices. Now, at Cisco definitely has a larger percentage of Asian employees in particular fields than the average. But the hiring has always been about merit, has been always. Silicon Valley is thirsty for talent. And I went out and hired as many good people as I could find, given the time frame. You got to remember, it's a very different thing when you get 10 years to hire 60 people. It's a very different thing when you get a single year. When you get 1 year to hire a bunch of people, and we're trying to hire experts, not just run-of-the-mill engineers, you go and seek out, of course, the world, and you also seek out your network, and you pretty much try to find the best you can. We had people from several ethnicities. We had white American engineers, we had European engineers, we had engineers from Russia, we had engineers from Asia, Taiwan, and a number of other countries. Of course, the CRD has a reckless indifference to the truth, so they painted the group as entirely Indian.
Right. Well, and I mean, the entire H-1B program, the reason those numbers continually go up is we do have a talent shortage in the United States. And so you do see people coming from different countries from across the world to help the United States retain a competitive edge. So, to your point, it's a combination of things. You can't just look at skin color and say, oh, there must be discrimination at play here. So 2015 to 2016, you're building this fantastic team on like rapid fire speed. When do things start going sour?
Yeah, so I think you set this up with, what happened before the lawsuit and something we haven't ever discussed. And there's probably a three-part sequence here. The first part, let's call that year one of sourness, if you will, is John Doe in the sort of first year when he was at Candid, there were several complaints on him. There were complaints beginning with senior engineers who complained about his work ethics. And so we had to make a number of decisions because remember when he came in, I gave him the same thing that I give to any employee, which is, shower them with help, shower them with resources, give them the absolute benefit of doubt, stand by them when there are complaints by them, help them, and in fact, personally get involved. I mean, I've literally spent 90-hour weeks on this startup in Candid for my employees, doing things for them, fixing architectural bugs, getting them resources, hiring, and pushing within Cisco. I mean, remember, there are several organizations within Cisco all looking for dollars and resources. I did the best I could for these employees, and including for John Doe. But there are complaints on John Doe. Ones that initially I could hold, I could fend off, I could fix by maybe giving him some resources. But at some point, the sort of drops become a river and the river becomes an ocean. Right. So we had complaints from senior colleagues on Doe. We had complaints later by his own junior members on the team. And some complaints begin as soft complaints, and then they become harder complaints. So soft complaints could be simply things like not turning up for work, not being available to answer questions, shirking responsibilities, or taking the easy path, right? And so you have, with engineering, as with everything else, the devil's in the details. And so let me focus on one aspect, which is taking the easy path. If you want to do a complex software design, right? There are ways to cut short the process. You use an external database, for example, throw something in, cook it up, and it works. Voila. But it may not be scalable. It may not be resilient. There may be bugs. There may be features that the system doesn't support. And so you've got to continuously improve these processes. You can't say, hey, I've done it, and it's done and dusted once and for all. And so we had a series of these complaints. And while I had to move resources away from Doe and reduce his responsibilities, 1+ year down the line, he comes in And when he doesn't make the head of engineering position, he files sort of internal complaints against me.
Hmm.
Um,
Did he apply for that position?
No, actually, not only did he not apply for the position, but you can see a pattern of behavior where he never wanted leadership positions. I mean, initially he would say, I'll do it, when you shover him. But the moment you give it, he is shirking responsibility. He's not hiring enough personnel. And we've shared all of this with the CRD. You have an employee that you're shovering resources on, but who refuses to hire at a pace that is needed. We have emails from him where he does not ask for a team for the next year's budget. I asked the man, how many people do you need to succeed to phase 2 of the project? Literally asked for half an engineer or one. It's insane, right? When you're trying to build a tech startup, managers want the best of talent. You want tons of money to hire, and you're planning a year ahead. He doesn't want these. And we've shared this with the CRD, coming to more details in a bit. But the short answer to you, year one was bizarre. You have an employee who is not performing, several complaints on him. We've done the best we can. And he then files a complaint saying that he didn't make the head of engineering position, a position that he never formally applied for.
Right. So he files this complaint, and I want to get a better idea of what does that internal, and I know this is going to help a lot of folks in the audience because we all work somewhere. What does an investigation look like? What did this investigation look like? Both from, let's first maybe talk about the Cisco side of things, and then maybe the CRD side of things, because it's a sequential, sequential events. So what does that look like when a complaint gets filed against you?
Yeah, it's actually, how do I say this? I mean, I think different people receive things differently. When I first saw the complaint, it sends a cold shiver down your spine, right? I've spent 40 plus years of my life before such a complaint being the rock for whomever I could be, And, as a leader, you sacrifice, you eat the last, you sleep the last, you come in first to work. You do pretty much everything you can. But the nature of the complaint was so bizarre that to me, it's shocking. And what you see is mostly the caste complaint, but John Doe made several other complaints on my character, and I'll touch upon one other in a moment. But the caste complaint was essentially right there, right, where he claims I've discriminated him based on his caste in a group, as you well know, I've spoken several times, in a group where there was another Dalit candidate, a person who self-identified as Dalit, who John Doe knows, by the way. John Doe knows this other Dalit senior colleague of ours. And who got all of these leadership positions. And now John Doe is claiming that I'm discriminating against Dalits. It was just so bizarre. And especially given the history and the record against him, for him to want the very top position, this is not like a minor thing that he wanted. You suddenly want to go from not coming into work with all these complaints to the very top position was very personally tough. The second thing I realized, and there's a lot of learning here, is the deep shock that goes through when your most empathetic and nice words are misconstrued against you.
Yeah.
And it's shocking because now your brain starts working and thinking 10 levels ahead and thinking, what are all the nice or good things or factual things that you have said that can be twisted by someone for no reason whatsoever? Right? There are many factual things we say, including in today's conversation that's recorded, that you can pick and tease apart and try to paint an intent behind that. So that was very concerning. And the third thing that was concerning, of course, was just the scathing quantitative nature of the attack. This wasn't just like a one-off request saying, well, I got discriminated, or I think I should have gotten the job. It was a personal attack.
Right.
And that's when you're dealing with this is hardly an employment issue. This is a human behavior issue. When you're dealing with someone, I'm not going to use qualitative words on this, though there are several meaningful choice words, but a behavior that is pervasive. When you are at the receiving end of that, and we've seen cases outside civil cases which are about domestic abuse, physical abuse, harassment, couples going through really bad and bizarre phases. This is no different, right? It's one person whom you're forced to be married with. The person happens to be in your group, right? So
Yeah.
there's no easy going away, and you're in a startup that has to perform, and he has a responsibility that he's been hired for. So now you're stuck in this boat, and you're going to face continuous assaults for the next 1.5 years. And John Doe made several complaints. Literally a week or two, there was something new that he would cook up, and literally I was left, empty-handed there.
So at the time that he files this complaint, the position's already been offered to someone else who self-identifies as Dalit. Is Cisco asking these questions? At what point does CRD get involved? And is CRD given this information?
Yeah. So before the CRD involvement, there's a second phase to this, as you asked, which is, of course, Cisco's involved. Cisco is obligated to look at the complaint. John Doe is making complaints literally every second week. And, Cisco's had us equally. You have a new HR person that gets assigned again and again. And Cisco wants to be, of course, very objective and fair to him and neutral to him. So they'll do an investigation. They'll put a new HR person when he wants to restart an investigation. He has the internal right to appeal the investigation. So this goes on ad nauseum. And not just me, he did the same thing with other managers after I left. And so you have a system that is being hijacked, right? Because when an employee takes 1 minute to shoot an email, the company is obligated to spend hundreds of hours on that. And Cisco did everything they could. They went and interviewed 20 plus people, as far as I know. And the CRD has all of that. And think about the personal toll it takes, where you have a manager. I'm trying to do the best for my employees. And a company now is obligated to go to each of my reports and ask, did this man say anything about caste? Did this man say anything about blah? It's to use the word, it's an anal poke, if you will. I don't know how better to say it. And there's probably much worse words or much worse analogies. But it's gut wrenching, to say the least. So you go from being a leader, helping and being happy and bringing all of that, to internally being completely demolished, even though outside you've still got to do the best for your team.
Right. So I'm going to just pivot a little bit here. I guess there's the most asked question as to why I'm referring to John Doe as John Doe. I apologize. It's by habit. Back in probably, 2 or 3 years ago, I did a really deep dive into all the court records, and I had figured out who John Doe was, because neither he nor the CRD did a very good job of actually hiding his identity when there's such a public profile available. So I will refer to him as his actual name. Chetan Narsude is his name. So for everyone who's asking that question, you can stop asking it now. I will correct myself. It was just a matter of habit. So I apologize on that. So back to kind of the sequence. Where let's shift to the CRD. What are you telling the CRD? You're thinking, okay, well, one, why is the CRD involved, right? Because clearly something has happened internally, and maybe you thought that the issue was resolved, but now all of a sudden the CRD is there. Walk us through that.
Just to touch on that last aspect, I actually never have thought that the issue would be resolved, and I'll tell you why. I've spent 20 years building startups, seen several people, and weirdly enough, in November 2016, when he filed his first complaint, I only came to know about it in December 2016. There was another court case, which was the gender discrimination lawsuit against Kleiner Perkins by Ellen Powell. And for good or for bad, analogies are only that useful. I knew that John Doe would, push this as far as he can. And he would push it in a way that he would have to spend zero resources on his own. It's just the nature of the person in interacting. When you're that, and I knew that just from looking at a salary complaint, if you will, when someone's making millions of dollars and have given away that, and you are so pushing for that, few extra $1,000 of annual increase.
Right.
Just more details that you know the nature of the person. So nothing that he did or is doing is surprising to me. Let's put it that way. But the CRD got involved after 2018, right? And I'll walk you through some of that process.
Yeah.
In the CRD's involvement, there's a phase where there's a year of basically what's called interrogatories. They did a subpoena, they took a bunch of HR records, and I gave them copious amounts of records. I personally sent more than 50 or 60 box folders of records on John Doe, including date-wise and chronological records.
I'm not surprised.
Go ahead.
I said, I'm not surprised.
Right. And many of these records show that John Doe's claims cannot be true. That's the sad thing that I wanted to share, which is they're aware of the cause and effect dates that cannot be true. They're aware of contradictions by John Doe, where he takes both sides of the same claim. They're aware of purely factually inaccurate claims by John Doe. They're aware of certain things he said and did with other managers other than me who have complained. They chose. And I sincerely thought, here is where one thing I was wrong. I sincerely thought that the CRD would be an honest broker.
Right.
And I was so wrong on that. I just assumed with so much amount of information, data, with more than, every manager he worked for, and some of the managers' names are not even in the current complaint, that have complained about him. And they're all on different independent things. They're not on like a single aspect of behavior. It's not like me sitting and orchestrating things with 10 different managers, right? I leave, I go, he has issues on different things. His issues on coming into work, doing stuff, shirking responsibilities. There's things where he wants to be an architect, right? Where he just wants to, come in and talk about reading code, and he calls that. There's a lot of details here, but the CRD was what surprised me the most. It's not an honest broker, right? And so they didn't interview people that they should have. The interviews for Ramana and me, were about 15 minutes, and most of it is just rank and file questions. What's your name, first name, last name, title, department, and blah. Instead of getting into the weeds, I mean, it's 7 years. They claim a hostile to Dalit environment, and they don't even bother to interview the other candidate who self-identified as Dalit, leader of the group.
Right.
So there's a whole 1.5 years of interrogatories, responses, subpoenas, followed by 2 mediations, where CRD has never been a meaningful or honest broker. I can't go into the details of the mediation because of mediation confidentiality, but if you look at Tesla's lawsuit against the CRD, they say essentially the same thing. The CRD doesn't want to get involved. There's not a single piece of objective conversation they want to have. It's all about throwing rocks at you and making claims that they can force a settlement on. In fact, just hot off the press, yesterday, Cisco filed 2 motions for sanctions against the CRD for very similar behavior, where the CRD refuses to answer any of the interrogatory questions that Cisco has posted.
Right. It's almost, look, most cases settle out of court, right? And it's a bullying tactic. I mean, kudos to Cisco, because I think 9 times out of 10 with my conversations with friends who are in labor and employment law, 9 times out of 10, you're settling out of court. Companies just want this to go away, even if they know that, discrimination likely did not occur. Certainly when it did occur, they're going to try to settle out. But a lot of times when it hasn't occurred, they also want to settle out of court because they just want to make this problem go away. I mean, it's not easy. Now we're 2023. They've been dealing with this since 2018, I guess, right? So they could have very well have let it go. I want to just be mindful of time. So I'm going to kind of combine my last 2 questions for you. And that is, and I'll just ask them both so then you can answer both of them. But if you had to do it all again, or rather, if you had to go through it again, I, for one, would have loved to just erase this entire chapter from history, because there's been such a reverberating effect for the entire community, whether it's, campuses justifying their adding caste to their policies, on the basis of Cisco, which is still not out of the courts, whether it's the city of Seattle, whether it was the state of California. So obviously I would want this entire thing to disappear, but if you had to go through it all again, is there anything that you would have done differently? Maybe one or two things on that. And the second thing I want to ask is that you've been harmed. Ramana has been harmed by the agency that's tasked with enforcing California's non-discrimination laws. Legacy media has refused to tell your story. And so in many regards, the damage that's been brought on to you by the CRD is irreversible. So what would justice look like? So those are my two questions. What lessons can we share with our audience if they ever find themselves in this, that you've learned going through this ordeal? And what would justice look like?
Yeah, I mean, the first primary thing I would do differently, and it's a hard thing because we're wired in a certain way, is stop being nice to someone who continues to push the envelope, right? I had assumed, just given the circumstances, that getting away, helping, assuaging would, help things here, right? I mean, if he chose not to come in for work, I left him alone, right? Because you always think about a retaliation claim and stuff. But at some point, you got to push back as a manager really hard. And I did to a certain extent, but you've got to prevent a truant employee from continuing this process for months and months on end. And to that end, I think we need a lot of improvements in the workplace in terms of, I haven't thought this through fully, but you need an equivalent of a 3 strikes law. What happens when an employee makes, there are 3 complaints on the employee by 3 different people? At what point is there an automatic process that says, hey, we're going to severe, right? What are things that you can do to help managers, handle these situations better? For example, when HR reaches out to any employee, most employees are some are just worried. They're just like, oh, HR, oh, what is HR? But you got to smoothen that process, right? So people shrivel up. People are afraid when bad things happen. When you have one truant actor, everyone jumps away from that person. But we actually got to train people to do the reverse. We got to train supervisors. We got to train colleagues. We got to train junior engineers to complain about bad actors even more forcefully and more vehemently. One single manager cannot, handle everything. You need a team of concerted people who say, enough is enough. We're going to complain. We're just going to put up with it. That's one. There's a lot of learning there. But the learning also needs to come with what can we do to fix it. My biggest learning from this process is your best behavior, your most empathetic behavior, your most truthful behavior can be held against you. And that is so wrong. If you live in a world where you have an agency that wants to misconstrue your best actions, then what recourse do you have, right? And so we need ways to fix that, whether that be, you don't need to wait 8 years to know that answering someone's IIT rank honestly in a job interview is not harassment, right? It should be obvious and confirm that. Quickly, to answer your second question, what does justice look like? I think there's many forms of justice. We need better laws, laws that can help against retaliation against supervisors. If you look at the current record from the data, it's very clear that John Doe retaliated against me. What recourse do we have? So we need laws that protect supervisors as much as non-supervisors. We need the CRD to be brought to justice. That is an absolute important aspect. I don't know what that looks like, but I know the process. The process has to be someone bigger than the agency, whether it be political or the Department of Justice. Someone needs to investigate this agency, not just on behalf of Hindus or Indians, but what they're doing to Californians in general. Right. And I'm committed to that cause to make that happen.
Well, I look forward to working with you on that, because I wholeheartedly agree with you that you can't have the key agency that's set up to enforce non-discrimination laws discriminating against Californians. See, Sheetal is on, which means that we're going to shift to our audience questions and try to get to as many as we can. So Sheetal, floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Sundar and Suhag. We've had a number of questions that actually came in during registration and a handful that have come in during the webinar. Some of them overlapped, so I'm kind of going to attempt to consolidate. Actually, this first question came in both during the webinar and also prior to the webinar. It's around slander lawsuits, and this goes to you, Sundar. The question is, can you file a slander lawsuit against the organizers of dismantling Hindutva, as both you and Ramana were explicitly named while the case was pending? Similarly, could you file a lawsuit against individuals like Denmozi from Equality Labs and the CRD?
Yeah, there's a lot there. The short answer is, of course, one can always find a lawsuit. In fact, to go through all the three, Gajendran Ayathurai, the professor at the DG's conference who shared our pictures, actually violated not just civil law, he violated what we understand as German criminal law. Sharing someone's photographs and making an allegation actually violates, there's a particular law on the books in Germany. So that is always an option. And we did reach out with legal recourse to Mr. Ayathurai. Whether we go forward with that or not is details, but he clearly went far and above. What do you do suing someone who Mr. Ayathurai was not even in the university when he used the university's name when he made that speech? So I don't even know what his financial resources are, but my focus right now is not retribution with someone like that. It's a sad thing to see a person who's an academic doing things like that. The DGH conference, it's TBD. I think these actors create a bad name for everybody. Let's put the CRD. The CRD is a more important one. I think this agency tries to hide behind every form of prosecutorial immunity, pending litigation, mediation privilege, confidentiality privilege, blah, 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 blah. There's probably 100 phrases that I've learned that the CRD uses to shirk responsibility. But my view is the reckless indifference to the truth and perjury should never be pardoned. And to me, independent of the slander, it's that perjury, the reckless indifference to the truth and what they've done to Californians, that they should be brought either to justice in a court of law, or better still, what I would like to see is a larger agency do the investigation, right? Because that is the right thing that has to happen there, but we'll see.
I'll just also add that in terms of suing the CRD, we have. It's a Section 1983 civil rights claim. Initially, it was HAF on behalf of the community, but we refiled, and both Sundar and Ramana have joined, as well as a number of other individual Hindu Americans in California that work in tech. So I think that we have kind of a multi-pronged approach, hopefully, to ensure that the CRD helps Californians rather than harming them the way that they have in this particular case, and some others that have come to light since we got involved in Cisco.
And Suhag, what is the status of that case against the CRD?
We had the judge gave us an opportunity to amend our brief. The judge felt that HAF alone may not have the standing. We were already actually planning. Standing is one of these very sticky issues that trial courts routinely use as a way of pushing out cases. And we've seen that on a number of fronts. So we had the opportunity to amend and refile, which we did. And so that is pending. I'll also just say that, legal action takes time. It takes patience. If you want to just look at, say, something like the Asian Exclusion Act, right? It was a law that specifically kept Asians from being able to immigrate to the United States, to become citizens, to naturalize, et cetera, et cetera. It took nearly 60 years for that law to be overturned, whether it was through the courts, whether it was statutory. Unfortunately, once something discriminatory occurs or is justified, it can take a long time to undo it, which is why we put so much effort into fighting SB 403. It's why we put so much effort into fighting some of these other caste policies proactively or reactively. So similarly, we have to be in it for the long game. And that's kind of how we're viewing it at HAF. It's not ever going to be a one and done. These are very novel legal questions that the courts have never seen. On top of that, with a topic like caste, which is so complex and convoluted. And so I foresee that caste litigation in one form or another is going to take a good 5 to 10 years for us to see the results that we need to see to ensure that our community has the equal protection under the law that every other community has and that the U.S. Constitution guarantees.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question to both of you that's been popping up a couple of times. It's kind of a two-part question. The first is, I think people want to know the latest on the case with you, Sundar. I don't necessarily know we were able to cover the end of that story. So if you could answer that, and then maybe Suhag, the next question is what has happened to Sundar? Was that perhaps the impetus for SB 403, or was that completely independent from this case?
Okay, go ahead, Sundar.
Yeah, I'll answer mine in brief. So in January of 2023, we filed a motion to sanction the state prosecutors, which alleged a number of things, but basically alleging a reckless indifference to the truth, the fact that they had no legal or even factual basis to claim harassment against Ramana and me. And if you read that, you'll see some of the most frivolous claims, like, filing weekly status reports is being construed as harassment. And that even some of those statements are not just frivolous, but they're actually perjurious from the data that we have. So this will come out potentially at some point. Based on that, the CRD voluntarily decided to drop the case on Ramana and me. So me and Ramana, we're out of the case. Cisco is still being sued, and they will try to extract their pound of flesh with Cisco. But that's where the case is at.
As far as SB 403 or the Cisco case being kind of a justification for SB 403, absolutely. It's been weaponized. And basically, Cisco has been the allegations have been stated as fact, not only by the media, but by what Senator Wahab said in justifying the introduction of SB 403. When you look at the student resolutions that have led to a number of caste policies on college campuses across the country, they cite the Cisco case. Some academics have even said, well, caste discrimination is rampant from coast to coast, referring to the raid of the BAPS Swaminarayan Temple to Cisco. So you have New Jersey and California. All of these things, again, are allegations. They are not facts, but they're being stated as fact and then being weaponized and used to justify caste policies against basically what represents less than 2% of the entire American population. Basically, to insinuate that the entire community is racist and bigoted, so much so that it merits laws that are going to ethnically profile and police us, even when the very scant statistics that are available on this show that this is an exceedingly rare, if not non-existent problem. And most importantly, that existing laws can protect against any sort of intra-community discrimination. Governor Gavin Newsom saw that. And so you see that he acknowledges what we have been saying from day one in the reason why he vetoed SB 403.
Great. Well, thank you, Sundar and Suhag. Really appreciate this conversation. Sundar, you can go back to wedding preparations. Congratulations again on the upcoming marriage. And thank you so much for giving us your time when you're on vacation in India. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for having me. I just wanted to sign off by saying, with the support of everyone and working together for the truth, we will prevail. We will win this. It's just a matter of time. But thank you.
Thank you. And for everyone here, I know this was a short conversation. There's still so much more, so many other questions that were not answered. Please stay tuned. In 2024, Suhag and Sundar will actually be doing a bit of a roadshow around the country. They'll be coming to select cities in the US, and they'll have a much longer, more detailed presentation where you'll be able to ask your questions in person. So please keep your eyes peeled for emails where they'll be coming, hopefully in a city near you. With that, I would like to introduce our final speaker, Mihir Meghani, our board member and co-founder, who also doesn't need much of an introduction, except to say that he has been HAF's Energizer Bunny for the past 20 years, pushing us to new heights. And he continues to be the most enthusiastic cheerleader for HAF that any of you will ever meet. Mihir?
Yeah, thanks, Sheetal, and also thanks, Sundar, and Suhag, and also HF staff, which all of you who are joining today have supported, who put this together. Tithi Patel, Krishna Parmar, and of course, I mentioned Sheetal, Suhag, Sundar for today. And thanks to all the other staff who were working on this. Before I say a few words that I planned, I want to, again, just really recognize that we've just been joined by United States Congressman from Michigan, Shri Thanedar. Thanks for joining. Ohio State Senator Neera Jantani has been on the whole call as well. And Tracy Richardson, who's from California State Senator Shannon Grove's office. Arjun Batra, our San Jose City Council member, and as well as Darshana Patel, who's with the Board of Education Pomona in San Diego, and Bhavani Patel from Pittsburgh. Thanks all of you for joining, and many other representatives. Everyone here today, want to just let you know that we're at a critical time here in our community's history. If you heard about what Suhag and Sundar talked about, it's that our community is really under an attack. And what happened to Sundar could happen to any of you. And over the last decade, there have been ideological attacks at us through city council resolutions against this type of legislation of caste. And it's going to be coming to us at our workplace individually, because there are people who do not like our civilization, who do not like the narrative that we put forth through our daily lives, that Hindus believe in justice, we believe in equality, we believe in pluralism and tolerance. We are not attacking people right now in the world. We're not killing babies. We're not destroying places of worship. We've stood for pluralism. That's what we're about. There's some people who just don't believe in that. And what Hindu Americans Foundation's work is about creating the institutions that are going to stand up and fight for us. We're all here today because there are people who fought and gave their lives for us over 5,000 years. In America, we're fighting in a way that was different than Hindus maybe over thousands of years fought in India. The way we're going to do it is by advocacy and education. And that means we need to create strong institutions that can represent us. That's what the Hindu American Foundation is doing for you. If you want to become a staff member of HF and put in 60 hours a week, please send in your application. We have openings. If you want to become a volunteer for the Hindu American Foundation and put in 20 hours a week, please shoot me an email. We'd love to have you. But one thing all of you can do is put some money in today. We've had 170 people on today. Can each of you contribute at least $1,000 for our work? The Legal Advocacy Center that Suhag spoke about, which is going to defend your rights and secure the future for your children and future generations, so that when we are facing the kind of things happening on campus that you're hearing about Jews facing today, when we need to fight to defend the kind of issues that Sundar talked about that are going to happen to at least one of you over the next year, when university presidents come and say that Pakistani terrorists can kill and threaten Hindu students on campus, and we need to fight, so we have a group for that, that's what our Legal Advocacy Center will do. That's what HF will do, but it's going to take money from our end. If we want to fight Hindu phobia, we want to promote the proper education of Hinduism for K through 12 teachers. We need your money for that. So whatever project of HF you want to support, whatever you feel you're passionate about, legal advocacy, education, building up our infrastructure, Hinduphobia, whatever it is, please make a commitment today. HF is a nonprofit 501c3 group. Your contribution is tax deductible. But isn't that the least we can do? Unless we're willing to sacrifice our lives for the cause. Unless we're willing to put in our time and careers for this cause. Sheetal, Suhag, Samir, the people you've also seen who are leading HF full-time, they left their careers. They're putting in 60 to 80 hours a week for this work, as are the other staff of HF, which are now 18. So I encourage you to think about what you can do. Stretch yourself a little bit, because it's not going to happen without money. Today, is also Hanukkah, and you see what's happening to our Jewish friends and allies, despite their contributions to America over a long, long period of time and powerful institutions. You had university professors in the last 48 hours who said that talk about murdering Jewish students on campus is going to be allowed by their universities, and they're grilled by members of Congress. Think about that. That's what we are facing as well. So we need to create that institution to fight for our 1 million Hindus, 3 million Hindus in America, and a billion Hindus worldwide. So with that, Sheetal, I know you've been very professional about keeping this on time. I'd love to talk more, encourage others, but I think we've made the message loud and clear. It's very simple for all of you. Our HF team has put into the chat here how you can contribute tonight online. They've shared links to various projects of the Hindu American Foundation, and I'll ask Tithi again to put the link of how everyone can contribute. And with that, I'm going to hand it, I guess, back to Krishna to close this program. Thank you, everyone. Namaste. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event and in one of our social media platforms as well. And I'm looking forward to your donation tonight. Hopefully we have over 100 people who could contribute online tonight. That'll keep our staff busy. Thank you. Bye-bye.